really, really interesting. And the anti-Semitic thing is one of those issues that snuck up on us because we thought, we had everything under control. So establishing clear classroom norms, it means you have to think of it in advance, but it's really important to do. Interrupting blatantly racist, sexist, and discriminatory behaviors immediately and redirecting the conversation. I mean, those are the things that we have to do. Diffusing potentially harmful moments by having students step back and reflect on the situation. So it's okay, and we learned this, to stop the class and to ask students to write reflective papers. It's like, get it out, get it out, get it out, get it out, get it out. And then let's talk about it. Defer. If it's a highly inflammatory racial situation, then you stop and say, we're gonna need some time to think about this. Let's come back and talk about it next time. I'm not saying we're not gonna talk about it, I'm just saying we're deferring it because that makes students angry. And when our students get angry, I don't know about your students, they take over buildings. So, and something that Gina talked about in our last session, asking for opinions of all the students, is asking other students in the class, what are your feelings? What do you think about this? How does this work? And letting people say how they feel, whether it's issues of race or ethnicity or religion or what have you. People feel, our students can feel our classrooms are hostile spaces for them. And that is not what we want them to do. And I have had this happen, I'm sure some of you have too, is that students break down, right? And you would think in 2015 there would not be classrooms where teachers or professors or TAs, or teaching assistants, would turn to someone because they happen to be of a particular background and say, what do you people think about that? That happens on our campus. So being vigilant about those kinds of things are really important to do. But ultimately, what this does is it can turn these hot moments, right, as I call it, to potential learning experiences. It's like, use the disruption, ride it, make it work for you if you can, and use the passion of the incident, because kids are pretty highly charged about that. We had this Islamic student in our classroom who did not wear a hijab, but she wore a headscarf. And there was a student in one of my classes who basically said, why are you wearing that headscarf? And she basically said, it's my religion, blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, certainly it's not a religion that Christianity doesn't make you wear that kind of stuff, so obviously Christianity is better than Islam. This is an intro to cultural anthropology, so I'm a first year student, right? So you're kind of saying, okay, now what do we do about this? She was a good a student about it, because she basically began to tell him why. And then other students around her also chimed in. So he was silenced, but what I wanted to do was to find out from him why he did that, and why he thought that was appropriate to do in class. He said, well, I was just trying to make conversation. And so if you get, it's the kind of thing where you use the opportunity to educate the person, the classroom, and you set a tone about what is appropriate, what is appropriate, what's not appropriate. So using the passion of the argument to look at how group dynamics work is really, really interesting, because it's sometimes not just the individual, it's about the group. Have you ever been in a situation where the group took over and you just said, how did that happen? There's an escalation, and it had to do with who speaks, who does not speak. And we know in the classroom there are generally people who are leaders in the classroom in terms of who speaks up and who doesn't. So the strategies of giving everybody voice or making everybody talk or giving them opportunities to talk is really, really important here. So you become a detective about who your students are, what they know, but also how they interact with each other. And it creates opportunities over time where these incidents are capable of creating learning opportunities at very deep levels. Because people connect at those deep levels. I'll go back to that incident at Cal State Dominguez Hills. It was probably the first time that students from these very, very different class backgrounds and cultural backgrounds sat down, and this was like for over like 3 or 4 hours. We had these conversations, and then the next day we continued them again for like another half day, where they were able to learn from each other and to know each other. The fact that they had families, that they were all trying to go to school, that there were the things they had in common. So the inclusion provides opportunities to talk about those things in common. But to make this happen requires a kind of comfort with conflict. And my research and the work that I've done and the positions that I've had pretty much says that most of us are pretty conflict averse. I mean, it's not a place where we like to live. But if we can learn how to harness that and manage that for the classrooms, it can provide those wonderful, wonderful opportunities. So I'm now coming to the point where I want to stop, and I want to ask you at your tables a question. And this is a personal question, number one. How do your own experiences, values, beliefs, and stereotypes influence your own knowledge and understanding of group or individuals who are racially different from you? And that we're talking about race now. Or racially different from your own experiences. So I want you to think about that for 5 minutes. You want to jot down a few thoughts. Then I want you to talk with each other for another 10 minutes at your table. And then after 15 minutes, we're going to come back and we're going to talk about that issue. Okay? Okay, folks. One more minute. Okay, folks, we're going to bring you back, and I'd like to ask you, as a table, the day's spokesperson, to tell me what was the learning at the table about yourselves at each of the tables. I want you to do that. What have you learned? What did you learn about your own self, but about the people at the table, and in terms of your sharing about how you think about things? Remember, And the very first slide, it's the precondition slide. It's like knowing yourself, what you're bringing to the party, so to speak. So, who wants to go first, or I can start calling on you? Any table one that just talk? Yes, sir.
So we were talking, and we came to the conclusion that as far as racial, sexual, or cultural biases, as long as there is an environment of respect, it really doesn't matter what the color of the skin of anybody is. As long as, and we all agreed on that, as long as there's a respect.
Okay, so respect is a key word that came out of this understanding.
Yes.
Did you talk about any times where that was challenged?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else, please? Yes? Our honoree, one of our honorees.
In our table, we discussed how we have to change the habit of mind.
Mm.
We need to also change from being descriptive, being a Hispanic serving institution, to being substantive. To bring substance to that, because most Hispanic serving institutions are really Hispanic enrolling institutions. We're not intentional about serving Hispanic students. We're not intentional about being equitable and all-inclusive in all our conversations, and including, gender issues. So we can talk and say we need more women, but we need to change the attitude of those that are here before we can bring women and retain them, for example. So
The intentionality of embracing that designation and giving it meaning through the work that you do.
exactly.
Okay. Okay, very good. Yes?
A lot of our discussions were about our upbringings and how it
Yeah.
wasn't until we were confronted or interacted with cultures other than what we grew up in, whether it's being raised in primarily the Hispanic community and then moving to Minnesota or New York, or whether it's being primarily in a WASP community going to El Paso or New Orleans, that those kinds of interactions and actually coming in contact with diversity and having those conversations is what really changed us and helped us all to understand why diversity is important and how to confront racial issues.
How diversity is important and how it is important to your work as well, or to you doing your work effectively, particularly in this 21st century environment with our students, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. And that could be, as you say, here in El Paso, it could be in California, it could be at the University of Wisconsin, it could be Minnesota, wherever. It's the world in which, the U.S. world in which we live. So we all bring our baggage with us, and our students who are 18, 19, 20-year-olds, our transfer students, they all bring their baggage with them, because we bring our cultured selves into our settings, and being aware of that and being able to step back and acknowledge that is really, really important. Anybody else, please? Yes.
Well, one of the things that we were discussing in our group is just how we do come with our bad
Prejudices. I know it's hard.
I'm not a Hispanic. But I think because we are in a Hispanic environment, we sometimes see the minorities as other groups. So we were just talking about Caucasians or white SLAs, because we see a big Hispanic population here in our group, and I think a lot of the times we bring something from what we see in the media or what we think are the stereotypes, but we have to keep an open mind. It's just one person is not representative of everybody as the race is said. So prejudices and kind of leave that back in the classroom so it doesn't reflect back and on our students. And it takes training, it takes being aware of what we bring to the classroom.
And it's lack of knowledge too, because there are things we just don't know that we're open to know, but we need to know where those resistances are. And we all have them. Like, there are certain kinds of clothing that I see young people wear that I just kind of go, oh my God. And I say, okay, get real. Has nothing to do with this, with the suits. I just think, I guess I'm thinking about physics, right? How did those pants stay up? And I laugh when I think about it, and because it's like, really, Yolanda, this is what, this is what is hanging you up here. And, but there you are. And it's acknowledging that. And so I've had some really interesting conversations with my students. Teachable moment for me, learning moment for me, in terms of knowing, who my students are and how they engage things. Yes, anybody else? Please, 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 please. What are you learning? What did you learn at your table about yourself?
We talked about gender bias mostly. And
Okay.
We call on, she calls on boys more, I think I call on girls more.
In your classroom?
We teach middle school and
Ah.
high school. So we see that we have more gender biases than other types of biases, but we also see that our students bring so many biases to the table when it comes to gay and special ed students and white kids having to be introduced to Hispanic literature, and how resistant they are to that.
Yeah.
So we try to deal with that in a loving way because they are 12 and 13 years old, but those are the sort of needs.
But by the time you're 12 or 13, you have some strong opinions, right? About the way the world is, or certainly about the way the world should be, if it isn't. So it's like, and that will get to our second question. It's a different kind of question. It's an empowerment question. But it's like our readiness to take these issues on. What do those of you do who are shy or conflict averse? Have any of you said, well, this is not the place to talk about that? It's okay, you're among friends. And
I've said I'm not the person to have guide this discussion, let's bring somebody in.
but you see, you had a solution. You had a next step. And it's the students on our survey, on our campus climate survey, they say they feel shut down. That it's like I'm brave enough to say how I really feel in this environment where I don't know what's going to happen with this information. And then I, speak out, and then I'm told, well, I'm sorry, this is not the class for that, or it's an issue that we are not going to discuss in class, or we don't have time for that. That's probably the one that ticks students off the most. So I think if we know that, and those of you who use data, listening and hearing what your students are telling you that you need to do is important, because it will make the next climate survey you do, or the next thing you do asking your opinion, more real to them, because they can see that there's been some movement in terms of what you're saying. And this is an environment where we pride ourselves on doing that. So can you imagine students in places where they don't feel that the institution is there for them or supportive of them? Walking in someone else's shoes. Okay, so the second part of this is knowing what you know about yourself and your experiences and what have you. How does this influence the way you behave in the classroom? And you've already given me an example of what you do. You say, I can't do it, but we will find somebody else to do it. How do you all handle these situations when they come up in the classroom? You don't have to go into your small groups to do that. You've had those experiences, and this is a wonderful opportunity to share with your colleagues. Yes.
I think sometimes it's interesting depending on what field you're in. So in political science, it's always a big question of the liberal versus conservative. And so I always find one of the things that is challenging but also a helpful avenue is that, especially when somebody says, Professor, what do you think about this?
Yes.
And my answer is, well, I'm not here to promote my personal agenda. I'd be happy to tell you what I think, but I don't want to be one of those professors that says, this is the party you should vote for, or that I can do, but I want you to think for yourself and come up with your own positions. And I know that, that there's a challenge of getting people to understand the difference between, we want to hear everyone's opinions.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I got good advice from one of my mentors to say, in your syllabus, when you put your objective, that we should respect everyone's opinions. And to add to that, the second part, which is in promoting diversity and understanding in a positive way. So when I run into a trouble, I've said to the students, remember, think about the university's mission.
Right.
Think about the contract that we have in our syllabus, because our syllabus is a contract. And if you're not sure about what you're going to ask or what you're going to say, just are you fulfilling that full aspect? And as long as you're thinking about that and you're being cognizant of not doing something that's going to be detrimental to someone else, then you shouldn't have any worry about putting forth your opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also say, up until last year, I'm tenure track, please. Do you know what that means?
I want to stay out of trouble. No, I'm not signing that petition. Thank you. Anybody else, please? Would you share what you do? Yes.
One of the things that we did talk about the second question is, as women and minorities, in academia, we've had personal experiences.
Yes.
When we're teaching a class that's, whether it's predominantly minorities or has a few single minorities, one of the things we try to do is to be a model and say, you know what, I've had this happen to me, because students relate more when you inform them of personal experiences and they realize I need to understand what they're going through, as opposed to standing in front of them and preaching at them.
Right.
So when you relate your own personal story and you're a minority, you're a woman, it makes them think and it makes them receive whatever message that you're trying to convey. So we have, me personally, I've used my personal experiences as, oh, listen, this happened to me and this is how I handled it, this is how I got through what has happened. And it serves them as a bookmark for whatever happens later to them.
And you feel comfortable doing that?
I do.
Yeah. Some people don't feel comfortable talking about themselves, but the fact that you can share your story is a strategy.
I do, because I want them to know that there are going to be difficulties and it's okay to talk about them as long as you respect others and you're aware of others. Because when you don't talk about them, what happens is when the student gets into that situation, they feel thrown into the rules and nobody has been choosing them before. So
Yeah.
if I'm a woman and I'm a minority and I'm in academia, I will tell them this is what happens and this is how you should prepare for it and this is how you should address it. I feel as an instructor, it's not just teaching about the material that I'm here to teach, it's also to teach them about life.
Right. At least that part of life that you can share with them,
Yes.
because they're on a journey as well, and you're further along on that journey. And I've had people say to me, wow, how did you get to be where you are? And I said, well, I started where you did. And they said, really? Yeah. And I said, yeah, I'm not that old. And by that, I mean, just 1 second. By that, I mean, I tell them I was from a working class family. I got a BA, and at a state university, I went to community college, and I was done. I didn't even know there was such a thing as grad school until someone told me. And then, when you finish telling your story, they're kind of like, wow, then that means, to your point, it's something I could do. And I said, well, I'm not recommending it for everybody, but you could be a changed person wherever you are. You don't have to have my journey, but you need to have some sense of self and that you can do it. So that's a good point. Yes, sir.
Well, I'm a psychologist rather than an anthropologist.
That's okay.
I have students coming in with a variety of diverse backgrounds. And I'm thinking in one particular case, a student walked into my office about 2 years ago. He was not one of my regular classroom students. Young Hispanic male, heavily tattooed, fingers, neck, the whole thing. And my first question to any new student in my office is, where do you want to be? What do you want to be doing in 5 or 10 years? And this kid said, I want to be a rabbi.
Oh.
And instead of saying, really? And he sought me out because he knew I was interested in psychology of religion. And last weekend I filled out a letter of recommendation for him. He's trying to transfer from our community college to Yale University. And he wants to major in religious studies. So I have students who are veterans, I have students who are disabled, and it'd be very easy for me to let the students define themselves as where they've been.
Right.
But I try to change the focus to where are you going? How can I help you get there? So if they want to talk about their past and what they've overcome, that's fine. And if they want to talk about where they want to go, that's fine too. I don't want any aspect of their background, gender, disability, ethnicity, to define them unless they embrace that as their own.
That's very good. Thank you. And I have a quick tattoo story too. How many of you saw the Academy Awards? And how many of you saw Lady Gaga?
Yeah.
And I was like, Lady Gaga, pop culture, all that stuff, singing, Sound of Music, Julie Andrews, right? And there this woman was that had these beautiful, actually, tattoos on her body that showed with her white flowing princess gown, right? And it's sort of like these cultural constructs that were kind of colliding with each other. And I said, that's who our students are. These are the people who are in our classrooms, who are bringing together all kinds of different flows and confluences. And it's up to us to help figure that out. It's not just on them to do that. It's about us expanding who we are and what we know about students and student success and what can happen. Yes.
I'm not a psychologist or
That's okay, you guys don't have to
I
apologize.
might need a psychologist. My own experiences as a female minority engineer has forced me to be a little too forceful on some issues. I do a lot of group activities
Yes.
and they work in groups, so I make sure that there's equal distribution of females. And the first thing I said is, and the female in the group is not going to be the reporter. She's not going to be your secretary. The man. So maybe that's not the best, but the question was not how we can do better, right? The question is how it influences us. So that's
Well, you're placing a cultural marker
yeah.
on that behavior.
Yeah.
Because it is assumed, and maybe young people don't assume that, right?
Yeah.
That it's the woman's role in the group to make coffee.
Yeah.
I mean, I know some places, rooms I go into for meetings, and people don't know who I am, and they ask me when the coffee's coming. And I say, when you get up and get it. I mean, I certainly earned the right to say, what assumptions are you making about, you know, who I am? And so I think that's it's a teachable moment as well, you know, as that. Oh, yes, ma'am, in the back. Oh, Gina, hi.
A piggyback to Yvonne, I'm teaching in applied cultural anthropology, and they're developing community-based projects. And then I start with the premise, diverse organizations are more successful. And there's a lot of research evidence to back up my statement. So form your groups. And then they're like, I want you. They just became proactive instead of me having to force it or to say, make sure you have one female, one male. I didn't have to do that. That was just the premise from which I began my conversation. And they're doing amazing projects, and they're seeing the benefit. I also, one of our community partners at the table said, what's your teaching pedagogy? Walk into the classroom and say, you all have amazing funds of knowledge. Your background is unlike mine. The ways you've been raised is not the way I've been raised. And as I come to teach you, you come to teach me. So let's get started. I had my students offering me resources, books, music. I have now a list of hip hop in like 6, 7 languages that I incorporate into my globalization lectures, because the funds of knowledge are coming from my hip hop artists in my classes, right? From my leaders, from students who are binational who are having amazing projects that they have begun, and they're bringing that into the classroom. So the premise from which we operate will heavily influence how we structure the learning of the student, and also how we as scholars will continue to be lifelong learners ourselves.
Right, and thank you so much for that, Gina. It's the dialectic, right? It's the two-way. It's what am I learning, because it's in some ways like on-the-job training for some of us. If we're open enough to it, we can create opportunities for us to make the next time we teach that class even better, because we have that input from those students whose lives have impacted the classroom and other students as well. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to move on, because there's another strategy I want to share with you that I have used and that we're using in another project that I'm doing with Mellon, and it's a project that focuses on understanding the relationship between diversity and global and international issues. It's a strategy, right? Like teaching and learning is a strategy, like educational excellence is a strategy. And so the idea here is that we look at ways that we tie our classes and what we value in our classes. This is where our content of our classes can come into connection with these issues, hot button issues that are in the news. So the idea of just and sustainable world, the idea of healthy communities, is a diversity issue and a triple bottom line issue for sustainability. And often communities of color say, well, that's not about me, right? And it is about what happens in poor communities, particularly poor communities of color in the US, around environmental racism and issues like that, right? So these examples I'm giving you are content-based, not pedagogy-based, but they do have pedagogy embedded in them. This idea of the role of the United States in the world. In my last session, I talked about US history and how we're like the big sort of fish in the world pond, and how with the diversity of our classrooms, we need to start having our students understand that as a nation, it's about the US being a we country instead of an I country or an us country. And the fact that we elected, again, I said the first African American president, US history, sends a message to other people around the world that everything is fixed here in the United States. And that is not the case. When our international students come here, they're kind of really surprised. Now, you think you guys are surprised you leave here and go to other places outside of UTEP? The international students who come here are just blown away because they don't necessarily get our country and our culture. Terrorism is an issue that is bandied about a lot here in the United States. And so the kind of work that we can do around diversity is to talk about the fact that it just didn't start with 9/11, that there's been domestic terrorists here in the United States, and the fact that it can't, if we're talking about terrorism here in the United States, questions have to be asked about why would people who are born in a country like the US or like France or like other places become radicals? What is it about this democracy that failed them? What is it that we need to understand in our teaching, in our classrooms about this issue? And then the relationship of terrorism to race, ethnicity in the US. When 9/11 happened, I was in New York City, and just about every brown Puerto Rican guy was stopped on the street in New York because he could have been or looked like a terrorist. And these are already labels that are deep. World health issues, understanding pandemics such as Ebola, HIV/AIDS, social cultural consequences of these issues. Those of you who are in the healthcare fields, understanding health disparities, and doing it both in a local and a global way. The fact that you're here in UTEP, right on the border, right? I mean, you're in this space that is international by definition. There are a lot of ways that you can open up this discussion about diversity and understand it in different ways that other places cannot do, and your research can do this. Oh, sorry. Yeah, immigration and migration issues. This is a global phenomenon, and it does have a U.S. face. And if we look at what's happening here in the U.S., that's a particular way to look at it. But then the systems and the structures in the U.S. can then be applied to Europe, because Germany and France, we're seeing cultural racism there, right? In Africa, it's not so much about skin color as it is about class and about rural-urban, and we do have rural-urban kinds of dichotomies here. In China, gender issues, rural to urban migration, and in China there are different groups. Anybody here from China? Chinese? There are different groups of ethnic groups within China. Some are more, there's a hierarchy too, so that people who are members of the minority ethnic groups in the Chinese experience a kind of discrimination as well. India, the caste system is demolished by law, but there are still embedded cultural differences among the different castes, which is similar to caste, class here that we don't talk about in the U.S. And when all these people come to the U.S., they quickly learn about our racialized hierarchy. They don't always know where they fit, at least not initially. But those are the kinds of questions that students ask me who come from other countries. Why do you all have, what is this affirmative action, right? Why is this important? And I think for international and our global students who need to be able to unpack these issues for them as well. Sustainability of fundamentalism. You know, we talk about fundamentalists, the fundamental Islamists. Well, there are fundamentalists within the U.S. as well. And if we talk about religion, we have to talk about it in a larger context, so that for those of you who teach global studies, you can then come back to UTEP and talk about issues that relate to these issues from your local perspective. So we're trying to figure out ways to engage people both in the content of what they teach as well as the pedagogy by looking at hot button issues. If you make these a part of your agenda already, then what you're doing is preempting a lot of those questions, and you're shaping how the conversation is around those issues within your classes. So what does it mean to educate our students for a diverse global society? We know that students in our classes represent the diversity of our country as well as the world. We also know, I don't know about you all, but we're inviting more and more international students to our campuses. Not necessarily because we like international students, but because international students pay more money. It's like the question over here, what does it mean to be Hispanic serving? What does it mean to invite people from other countries to our institution and then do nothing once they're here? How do you integrate them? It's the integration into the learning process that is our challenge around these issues. And how we do that, and how we do that well, is going to indicate how our success with our students. It's not just about book learning, but it's about how they are integrated and engaged in the learning process from where they sit. So if we say this phrase, and every university has it, how do we prepare our students to live and work in a global society? How do we have that. But my question is, and how do we know when we've done it? And when we've done it well, that is our challenge. So there's help out there for, to do that. There are resources out there. I just have this one, it's AAC and youth work. This particular one is Purposeful Pathways. I'm sure there are other documents from that organization that you use, but they embrace global learning and have outcome assessment tools where you can actually figure out what you're doing here to create that kind of student that develops the skills and habits of mind that look beyond local environment. Provide wide-ranging knowledge acquisition and practice for both study and intercultural experiences, and promote comprehensive engagement with important cultural, scientific, and societal issues. That's what we want. We want that kind of engagement. I think that's what we want. So how does this look on our campuses? Well, it could be from all kinds of directions, including advancing language learning. What kind of language learning programs are they that promote this issue? You can do your own inventory, right, on your campus to find out to what extent language learning is linked to these cultural issues. Create new creative spaces, engaging faculty from across the campus. Institutions sometimes are not equipped to reward faculty for doing this kind of work. If we teach a class, only one person on my campus gets credit for it. I don't know if you guys have developed a way to do it on your campus where you can both get credit for it. That's really important, because otherwise, what's the incentive? Diversifying the disciplines and their pedagogies. Often, your professional association, American Anthropology Association, American Psychological Association, American Chemical Association, American Biological Association, are grappling with these issues too. And they often have tools and resources that you can use. There's an organization called, I think it's called DIN. Is it DEN? Where 12 or 14 different disciplinary associations have come together to look at issues of teaching and learning and working with diverse students. Maximizing engaged scholarship and service learning experiences. You have those here on campus, integrating those into the academic as well as co-curricular, live kinds of activities. And then, if you're going to invite international scholars here from other places, figure out ways to integrate them in substantive ways in your classes and in your curriculum. Because at least they tell us, in terms of our surveys, they want to be integrated. They don't always understand everything at first, but they want to be integrated. For example, many of them come from places where they just lecture, and you're saying you have to speak up, you have to say stuff. Your grade depends on your class participation. Well, that's a whole new way of learning for some students. And then intentionally linking international issues and diversity issues, especially for the UTEP region. And I talked to you about the singularity of of this experience and how important it is for that to be institutionalized and written about and talked about, packaged for campuses around the U.S. to see it. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that colleges and universities like UTEP are sites for change around diversity and globalization, because where you sit situated and you provide the space, figuratively and literally, for new thinking, and that's what we're talking about here today, new models for change. There are places where we can transform old structures, which all of us have, right? I mean, we're just very siloed and all that kind of stuff, and create new ones, one classroom at a time. And a CETO conference like this allows us to get together to at least have these conversations. And I thank you for inviting me. Thank you. Oh, and any last questions or comments? All right, am I done? One question or comment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One more round for Dr. Moses. That was wonderful. So 2 quick announcements. So first, in about 10 minutes, we will begin the podium sessions. You'll notice in your program that they are in 6 different rooms. That's how many sessions we have. We need 6 parallel sessions. Some of the sessions are on this floor, and some of them are on the first floor. So be sure to check the schedule to go to the correct one. And then after the podium sessions are done, back at 4:45, we will come back to this room for 3 special things. 1, there will be a networking session with our keynote speaker tomorrow, Dr. Lynn Blanchard. 2, there will be poster presentations, and by the way, the poster boards will be available for setup starting at 4 o'clock for those of you who need that time to get it ready by 4:45 when the actual presentations begin. And as if that weren't enough, the third thing is there will be a cash bar in this room. So you can enhance the conversation with a 21st century libation. So